Hello, so welcome to the very first panel for this year's YA ThrillerCon. I'm delighted to be here chatting with some amazing authors, and we've got this brilliant conversation planned for you today, all about writing compelling characters. Now, this is a live stream broadcast to YouTube as well as several other social media platforms, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you're watching live and want to submit a question for our panelists, you can use the live chat facility on YouTube, or if you're watching on social media, just leave a comment and we should be able to see it. And we will be selecting some of these questions at the end to ask the panelists. So yeah, we're going to be talking about writing compelling characters. So before we get into the discussion, I'm going to invite each of the panelists here just to introduce themselves and their latest book or what they're currently working on. So Natasha, would you like to go first? Okay, not sure if Natasha's frozen. We will come back to you. Mocha, would you like to go first?
Oh, okay, thanks. Mine is First Kiss by Kit and Tully, and it's currently on Kickstarter. So it's my first Kickstarter project, and it's got off to a good start. So I'm very excited about that. It's a YA mystery series.
And I love that series so much because you're one of my critique partners, and I cannot wait for that book to be out because then I can just tell everyone to read it because it is amazing. Natasha, you're back. Yay. Would you like to go next with introducing yourself and your latest book or what you're currently working on?
Hi. So, yes, I write fiction. Sort of my last book was a coming of age semi-historical called No Be From Here. But I also am a writer of short stories that have been published in different anthologies. I think one of which is Hotel Africa. And I'm currently working on a love story set in 1950s Northern Rhodesia, which is now Zambia. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, Kat, would you like to go next with introductions?
Hi, yes, I'm Kat Ellis. My latest book is Wicked Little Deeds, or Burden Falls as it's known in the US, which is a horror thriller that came out last year, and it's full of murder and mystery and family feuds and a cursed, possibly haunted waterfall.
Just the kind of things that I love in a book. Carly, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name's Carly Nugent. I'm in Australia, so sort of close to Melbourne, and my latest book is Sugar. So it's a young adult novel about a young girl who has type 1 diabetes, but she's also kind of discovers this person that has died, and so there's a little bit of a mystery element to it as well. So, and that just came out in April in Australia. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And Andreina, would you like to finish with the introductions?
Hi, I'm Andreina Cordani, and I'm the author. My latest book is Dead Lucky, and it's about an influencer that gets killed on camera by a masked figure, and then they have to figure out who did it. So it's a proper whodunit.
Great. Yeah, so amazing books, amazing panelists, and I'm so excited to be talking to you today. So firstly, let's start off with talking about how you actually got started with writing, whether you always wanted to be a writer or if it's something that sort of crept up on you by surprise. So Kat, we'll come to you first for this one.
I think I was kind of late to writing, really. I didn't try and write a novel until I was in my mid-20s. I'd always enjoyed writing growing up, and in uni I did a bit of it, but yeah, it was only when I came back to reading YA that I suddenly kind of got the bug for writing, and I thought I'll sit down and write it, you know, just without any help, any like courses or anything like that. It was a massive mess, my first attempt at writing a novel, because I was pantsing it, and at heart I'm really not a pantser and somebody who needs to plot things out quite carefully. So yeah, my first attempt at writing a novel, mid-20s, absolute pile of garbage, and thankfully not that many people saw it.
Okay, so Carly, what about you?
Yeah, I wrote a lot as a kid, short stories and things like that, and then I got into writing for the theatre. So I did quite a bit of script writing when I was at university and living in Melbourne. Melbourne has a pretty vibrant theatre scene. But then I moved overseas and I was living in Asia for about 6 or 7 years. And while I was there, I started writing more short stories, and then I started writing, middle grade was my first novel as a middle grade novel. So I started that while I was overseas, joined some writing workshop groups, which was really amazing and really helped me so much with my writing. So so that's sort of, I guess, something I've always been doing, and then have loved for a long time.
Okay, great. Andreina, what about you?
I think when I was at school, a couple of people told me that I should be a writer, in a sort of very flippant, throwaway way, and I kind of clung to it as this thing until it became my identity. I had to do it. But I started off as a journalist because when I left university, I thought I didn't really have enough writing, like life experience, to write something meaningful, which actually is total garbage if anyone's listening to that. I wish I'd just started writing straight off the bat, but I went off into journalism, and that was lots of fun and very interesting. But it means you can't, when you come home in the evening, you spent all day writing features for women's magazines, you don't really feel like writing. So it wasn't really until I went freelance and took a step away from full-time magazines that I felt like I could go back to writing properly. So I started early and then had a massive break in the middle and then came back to it.
Okay. And Mocha, what about you?
I really related to what Kat was saying about, writing those first manuscripts, and they're really like, and you're kind of like just going at it, you haven't any critique partners, you haven't looked into any kind of craft or anything like that, and it's just like a big hot mess. So I spent a long time in that before I started to find partners, find groups, and level up and sort of figure out, because it is a business, and it's that, and there are expectations, and there are certain things that novels have to achieve to be successful. So it took me a long time to sort of start getting into that and figuring it out, and not just seeing it as a purely creative thing where you just write when you're in the mood, because when you just write when you're in the mood, as you probably all know, you don't write very much. So
Okay, great. So Natasha seems to have lost her internet connection again, so hopefully she will get back on screen. But in the meantime, we'll go on to our next question. So this is kind of a bit of a debate as to whether your books or books in general should be character-driven or plot-driven. Whenever I've talked to other authors about this, they always seem to fall in sort of like one camp or the other, where it's like, yes, character-driven, or yes, plot-driven. So I'm really intrigued to know what your thoughts on this are. So Carly, we'll come to you first for this one.
I know for me personally, it's definitely character comes first. I generally start with a character, and I always write in first person. I've tried to write in third person, and it just doesn't seem to work. I feel like I need that really close connection with the character. So I usually start with a character and sort of just write as them and try and get their voice and get into the story that way. And I'm trying to be a little bit more of a plotter, but I'm a big pantser. I definitely start with one little thing or one little idea that's usually connected to a character, and then I just sort of sit down and try and vomit first draft it out, and then the plot kind of comes from the character. And I think that's I find that fun, because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the character is going to do, and so it's surprising as I'm writing to sort of discover where it goes. And a lot of the time in a first draft, it goes in directions that are ridiculous and that I would get rid of. But then other times it goes in directions that are surprising and that work, and then you keep them in a second draft. So I definitely say that I'm a character-driven writer, but I don't think that's necessarily true for everyone. I don't think that's how it has to be, but that's the way I find works best for me.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you said really resonates with me, because that's the way I write as well. Because I found that if I try planning it out, I lose interest in it, because I almost feel like I've already written the story, and I have to be constantly surprised and just sort of like discovering what's happening at the same time as my characters.
Definitely.
Yeah, so Andreina, what about you?
Yeah, I'm a pantser as well. My first book, The Girl Who Was Completely Pantsed, and that was completely character based. It was basically the concept of it was a girl who witnessed her mother and sister being murdered when she was younger and growing up with the pressure of that, and then having an annoying stepsister come into her life who was a bit sort of flamboyant and fun and everything. And the entire book was driven by these two people clashing against each other. And the plot kind of came afterwards. I didn't know what I was writing for a while. Dead Lucky was obviously a little bit more focused because it's more of a whodunit. But it's still like the characters are what interests me, and that's what makes me want to open up the document and start writing it. And I don't like I think Carly was saying that the idea, you have the idea for the character first and like a situation to put that character in, and then maybe the plot comes after that. But I feel my way as well with it. So yeah, I wish it was plot, but it is character.
Okay. Mocha, how about you?
Well, I'm a discovery writer too, but I think at the same time I need an idea for the plot, because I've actually had a setting with some characters in it in my head for ages, and I just can't get a story. Like they just like, I think the characters are quite interesting and I like the setting, but nothing's happening. So I realized then, no, I definitely do need some kind of premise or idea to hang it around. And if I have a premise, then the characters seem to come to fill it in. So I don't know what that means really, but I think it probably means I'm more plot driven, or at least premise driven, because I'm not a planner, so I never really have a plot as such, but I do have an idea. And if I don't have the idea, the characters on their own they just sort of sit there doing nothing, and I just can't get them to do it. And I think that's one of the things that attracts me to the mystery thriller end, is because you have to have a plot and you have to have something happening. Because the setting with the nice characters that I had in my head, I wanted to write something that wasn't a mystery, and it's just nothing's happening.
Okay. And Kat, how about you?
So it seems like I'm the outlier here because I'm definitely the plotter. I wish that I could pants things a bit more because, I feel what you were saying before, Maddie, about, the excitement of discovering things as you're writing. And I guess some of that does get lost sometimes, but I tend to plot things out. And even before I get to my characters, I'm thinking more about setting and things like that. And I think I kind of work outwards fill in the details, and the characters tend to emerge that way for me. I think my settings tend to be kind of the first character that I come up with. And then I think, well, okay, this is a very weird small town where spooky things happen. What kind of person would live here? And, what kind of person would do the things that I want to happen? So that seems to be how my characters emerge for me. And it tends to happen over quite a few drafts.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I love the idea of viewing the setting as a character as well, especially sort of in the darker genres and the speculative. I've been reading a lot of horror and ghost stories at the moment. I can definitely see the setting is pretty much an extra character, and it's just so important to so many of these stories. So yeah, let's talk a bit about character creation. So what goes into constructing a character? Do you plan, I know we've talked a bit about discovery writing and plotting, but how much planning of your actual character and getting to know your character do you do before you're actually writing the story? Carly, we'll go to you first again here, because I recently read Sugar and I absolutely love your main character. One of the most multifaceted characters I've ever read, and it's just sort of I was in love with your character, even though your character wasn't always that friendly at times, and I was just so drawn and kept feeling so compelled to keep reading. So how did you create your main character?
That's really lovely. Thanks, Maddie. I feel like, obviously I like her because I wrote a whole book of her, but she's frustrating sometimes to me as a character. So I'm type 1 diabetic, and my character is type 1 diabetic. So a lot of that side of her character, I guess, was me kind of putting some stuff on the page that I've been feeling about stuff that I was dealing with. And I'd also spoken to a lot of younger people that have diabetes as well. So that kind of fed into it too. I guess, like I said before, it was mostly kind of starting with that idea that she's just been diagnosed and she's angry. And that was kind of, and you know, other stuff has happened in her life on top of that as well. That's sort of, she's got this mountain of things going on. So I started with that, and then I just sort of started writing and kind of followed her in that way. But then I guess as I went back and redrafted, I did do a lot of, I like to do a lot of character stuff. So I like to kind of look at what's on the page that's come out of that kind of discovery writing, and then do a bit of a profile and sort of figure out, you know, like what is already there, and then what I want to add in and layer into that character. So I like to do like a character profile. I can show you. And sometimes I like to draw the character, so that this is just a very, very, I'm going to be able to show you.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you can see that.
I like it.
But
Yeah.
and it's just, and I'm not a great drawer, so I often I'll find a photo or something and then copy it. But yeah, so I like to do that and write a list of all those profile-y things like age and, you know, what she does, what she's interested in, and those kind of things. And then I try and write her connections to other characters. And I also try and think of people I know in real life that might have some similarities to that character. Then it's never like this character is this person, but I feel like it's helpful to me to be able to picture a person at a certain moment, or, you know, to draw on that as well. So I think that's basically how I would create, how I created that character anyway.
That is so interesting. And yeah, what you're saying about it's helpful to sort of like know a person who might represent that character in that one specific moment. I find that really helpful as well, because it helps me making sure that my character is authentic. And of course, we are inspired by like the people that we know, the people that we meet, people we read about. Almost just like studying the people around us is just so helpful. I definitely find that that's really helpful with character creation.
I read something today about that, and about how like you're kind of a bit of a spy, and you sort of like paying attention to detail of people around you and it feeds in. Yeah,
I love the idea we're all spies. So Mocha, would you like to go next? Like, how do you create your characters?
Yeah, I agree with what you both were saying about taking inspiration from people you know around you. And I think it's something writers get asked quite often. It's like, oh, have you put me in your book? Or, you know, is their character based? So especially by like, you know, people closest to you. But it's not like that. It's not like you're taking somebody you know and putting them in the book. It's more like often the people you've met that you might, an aspect of them might appear in that they're really random. It's just because you need a specific thing, you know, like a specific emotion or a specific reaction to a specific scene, and suddenly a person comes into your head and you're going, oh, they do that in this instance. So you end up, you know, using their gesture or their kind of way of speaking or whatever. And it's not really like that you're kind of going like, oh, I'm going to base this character on this person. It's more that what you're writing suggests a reaction that then makes you think of, oh yeah, that's that person.
And it's really specific, like the specific detail of something someone does, rather than that person as a whole person.
Yeah, exactly. It's often just kind of a scene-based thing where you need, you know, what way would that person get angry, or how would that person, you know, if their best friend said this to them, how would they react? And then you kind of, you know, a scene comes back to you of something similar that may have happened, and you just use that bit, but you know, it's not necessarily the rest of the personality or the rest of the character.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I love the idea that like our characters linked to so many different people in real life, just like so many multiple moments of different people just sort of get amalgamated into like the one character, that we can then shape that character to do exactly what we need in the book and be exactly the type of person. So Andreina, would you like to chime in with your thoughts on character construction?
Yeah, so I was thinking, I don't really do that. I don't take from real people. I take sometimes. I think I'm creating characters that are very different from me, and then I realise that actually there's strands of me in this. There's lots of me. I must have a massive ego or something. But like I was just thinking that there's one, like in Dead Lucky. One of my favourite characters is Frida, who is the sort of new best friend of Maxine, who's my sleuth. And you don't quite know, she's got secrets. You don't know what those secrets are, her character's entirely constructed through things that I needed her to be, but yet she feels like one of the most interesting real people in the book. But I needed her to have X, Y, and Z. Without spoilers, I needed her to have certain characteristics in order for certain things to happen in the book. But yeah, so she was much more kind of thoughtfully constructed, I suppose, than taken from outside. But I do sometimes see people, like, especially online, people doing stuff and reacting in ways that I never would to anything, and I think, oh, that can go in a book. But I think it feeds through much more subtly. I don't sort of go, oh yeah, I remember that cat bin lady from a couple of years ago. She could go in there. It's not conscious, but it probably does feed in just more subtly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you're saying about like people online as well. I love like looking on social media and seeing what people are arguing about, and like seeing how almost how like engrossed in these arguments people get, even about like the silliest, smallest things, because then you begin to realize just like that these things are like really important to them, and you might not have realized that before. And yeah, I mean, it's quite entertaining as well, reading like people's arguments online too. So that is a big part of it. But I always say, like, when I'm reading it, it's sort of like teaching me more about the psychology of like arguments of people, of understanding of what's important. Yeah, so Kat, you've already mentioned a bit about how you create your characters, and that you create your setting first, and then you think about the kind of people that would actually live there. So would you like to elaborate on your character creation process, please?
Yeah, so in practical terms, I have what I call a murder wall. So it's actually facing me, so I can't show you, otherwise I'd knock everything over. But basically, I have like a wall that I cover with like post-its and notes and character profiles and things that I add to as I'm going on. I don't tend to do all of this before I start writing. It might help if I did, but as I was saying a bit before, that my characters tend to emerge for me more as I'm going through the drafts. I think I view my main character as like somebody that I need to know as well as I know my best friend. So it's not somebody that I know as well as I know myself, but somebody who I know, what makes them mad, what would embarrass them, things that they look back on and that absolutely devastates them. I need to know these important things and how they would likely react, but it still allows me some room to be surprised by what my characters do and how they develop. So I think, that was something that I was looking at with Wicked Little Deeds, the main character Ava, at the very beginning of the story. It's a year on from her parents who've died like in this massively tragic car accident. And at the beginning of the story, she's just having to move out of her family home that they've lived in for generations. Her family's lost all their money. So she's come from like growing up in a very privileged kind of lifestyle, and now she's had everything taken from her. So, on the surface of things, you'd think that she'd be a very like grim character, and to some extent she is, because she's obviously mourning. But at the same time, I knew that this character needed to be somebody who had a sense of humor about things, and had a good set of friends who would bolster her and keep her grounded, and make her see that there's still like lots of cool things going on in life. So I think that's part of my construction process, is looking at who are the people that she associates with, how are her family affecting how she's developed as a person. So that tends to be my process, I think.
Yeah, and that's so interesting as well, creating your characters in order so that they do something or allow something to then be revealed to your main character, or sort of push your main character to express something else or do something else that they might not ordinarily do. And that actually leads me perfectly to my next question. So thank you for that, Kat, because I was going to ask about creating your protagonist and your antagonist. So Kat, we'll start with you with this one. So do you construct both of these characters at the same time, given that their goals are usually in complete opposition to each other?
Well, this is quite a tricky one for me to answer, because my most recent 2 books, Harrow Lake and Wicked Little Deeds, have had the obvious main villain. I mean, in Wicked Little Deeds, it's the ghost of dead-eyed Sadie, and then in Harrow Lake, you have Mr. Jitters, who's this like ancient cannibal who lives in the caves. So you have these like obvious villains. But then you have the other antagonists who are more realistic characters who turn out to be, you know, the bigger bad in the end. And I do love creating villains of both stripes, to be honest. But I think because you spend so much time in your main character's head getting to know them and, you know, obviously just telling the story and what happens to them and seeing their journey, I think my main character, my protagonist, is always my favourite to write. But I do love a villain. I mean, I write horror thrillers, so you've got to love the villain, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, villains are kind of essential to horror thrillers, especially. Yeah, so Andreina, what about you then? Do you construct your antagonist and protagonist at the same time?
I think because obviously it's a whodunit, so I can't say who the antagonist is. But I think you can. Yes, I did, because I was writing about all the characters at once. I think, and right when I was planning it, I had like everyone's characteristics in mind and their distinctive sort of mannerisms and everything. But I did find the motivation for my antagonist came later, and then I had to sort of work on why, because the thing is, it's a monstrous thing that is, you know, someone is murdered on camera by someone wearing a mask. It's not like, oh, 2 people got in a fight and it got out of hand or something. It's like it's nasty, grisly murder that happens on the first paragraph. So what would have to happen to somebody to make them like that? And, you know, why would you do something in such an outlandishly showy way? And that was the thing I really struggled with, actually. But you know, I think, well, I quite enjoyed my motivation in the end, but I don't know if the readers did. I hope so. But it did come to me eventually. I was sort of looking. Actually, I finished the first draft, sent it to my editor, knowing that I hadn't nailed it properly. Went for a run and thought, oh God, yeah. I just sort of sent an email like, can I have it back now? So yeah, it's sort of the characters developed as I wrote, but the motivations for them came later, maybe.
Okay, great. And that's such a good point about the motivations as well of the characters, because obviously you're like, if you're writing an antagonist, they can't just kind of be evil for the sake of being evil. Like they have to actually be evil for a reason that makes sense to them and their environment. So yeah, Mocha, let's go to you next with this one.
Well, in Kit and Tully, the antagonist is kind of like the rival. And he quickly turned into a character readers love to hate. So he's great fun to write. He's kind of like, what can I do that'll make people hate him more? But at the same time, he's a very good looking guy. He's very charismatic. So like, I mean, he's a successful or relatively successful rock star at the start of or about to break out kind of rock star, but he has a big following. Everyone thinks he's amazing. So like, he has plenty of good qualities, but he's also like, dodgy. But Kit is absolutely mad about him at the beginning. So the whole thing was to kind of like make it obvious why she was mad about him, but also have the reader thinking like, oh no, like that guy is such a bad idea. Like, stay as far away as you can. So and he stays in the series the whole way through. And anytime it gets dull, he just livens it up. I love writing him. He's just like, I just find he's always fun. He always kind of makes things happen and drives things forward. But he's not likable or anything, but he is funny. I think he's funny anyway.
Yeah, and like humor is such an important part of these books as well, especially when we have got like these dark characters or exploring dark subjects. A lot of the time we do have like this incorporation of humor, almost however slight it is almost always there in some retrospect. So Carly, let's come to you, because one thing I really liked about your main character is that she's kind of like her own worst enemy too, and there's a lot of like the antagonistic forces are within your protagonist. So I was really wondering how you created her character where she's almost both the protagonist and the antagonist.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about too when you asked this question, because I do feel like she is her own worst enemy in so many ways. I mean, there are other characters that she obviously comes up against in a more external way, and that's part of it as well. But yeah, it was tricky thinking about it in that way, because it's not as easy as sort of thinking about it in an external kind of antagonist protagonist traditional way. So I guess it did just come out of the writing and getting to know her as a character. And also, I mean, and I think Andreina, maybe you said this before about how a lot of yourself goes into your characters, and I think that definitely happens to me too. Like and sometimes it's unconscious, and then I'll go back and look at something and go, oh, that's a thing that I have, or that's a fear that I have, or that's an anxiety or something that I think. So I think a lot of writing this book was to do with me trying to come to terms with some of that stuff. So, she feels, and this is not a spoiler, I don't think, but she does feel like she's trying to figure out why she has diabetes and not other people. So what has she done to the universe? Why is the universe punishing her? And so there's that kind of, and it sounds ridiculous when you read it, but that was going on in my head when I was diagnosed. So it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess seeing it on the page helps to process some of that stuff as well. But yeah, it is fun. Like the conflict is fun to create, I think, like as you're writing, like I think Mocha, like you were saying, that character, even though they might not be the most likable character, that those are the moments that are interesting and push the story forward and make your characters do more interesting things. And I definitely feel that as well, like with Persephone in this book, like her own
Oh.
Okay, so I think we have lost Carly for a moment with the internet.
Kind of everyone's back.
Okay.
No. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're back now. Yeah.
Yeah, I lost you for a second. Yeah, I just think her own, she kind of sabotages herself, and that in those moments, that's kind of where things push forward as well. So yeah, I think that was kind of interesting to go on that little journey with her as that was happening too. So
yeah, and I think that's especially what makes her such a compelling character as well, especially with the like disability and illness representation as well, because obviously that's so important. Just sort of like showing these conditions and showing exactly what it's like living with these as well. Yeah, so you mentioned a bit about creating conflict there, Carly. So I'd like to dive into that a bit more. And I know this is a bit off schedule because I haven't given you this question in advance. So hopefully we'll get some entertaining and fun answers to this. But what tips do you have specifically for creating conflict if you feel that your character isn't sort of behaving in the way that you want them to be, or that you essentially just need more conflict in the book? How would you go about bringing in more conflict? Yeah, and Carly, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, because I feel like a lot of the time, like especially when I'm writing a first draft, which is what I'm working on something at the moment, and I'm first drafting it, and a lot of the time that will happen where you'll get to a point and you'll go, I don't know what these characters are doing what they should be doing. I think Mocha was saying it before too, about like, how you've got these characters and they're not going anywhere, or they're not doing anything. And in a first draft, when that happens, I feel like when I was younger, that would be the point where I would go like, what am I doing? This is stupid, and I'd give up or I'd put it away or something. But now I just try and write through it, and maybe there'll be quite a few pages where nothing happens and it'll be very boring. But then eventually I find that like something will, if you sit there and do it long enough, then something will happen and take it in a different direction. I don't know. But yeah, I have a friend who does this thing. It's like a writing prompt exercise, and she calls them dislocators. So you throw in really random, and you can just open a book and pick out some words, or you could do it in a more structured way, and I guess like look at some traditional conflict sort of stuff and then throw them in and see what happens. I guess that sometimes that can be fun as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I know sort of like writing prompts can be very helpful if particularly if you're stuck with your writing. So yeah, Kat, what are your thoughts on this and how to sort of like add in more conflict if you feel that it's lacking?
Well, on a very basic level, similar to Carly's friend's dislocator, I tend to just kill somebody. If I feel that things are getting a little bit tame, or things are a bit too easy for my main character, I'd kill someone. I mean, maybe it won't actually be an actual death of a character, but I'll blow up the world somehow, just disrupt what's happening. If things are going a little bit too steadily, or maybe she's hit a dead end, you throw in a ghost or, a monster climbing out of the wallpaper or something. There's always some way to disrupt what's going on in my stories, I think. So yeah, I think if you need to kill somebody, do it, and maybe it won't be an actual kill somebody. But
I love how you just said I tend to just kill someone, and like I was just thinking if we had a viewer who just like tuned in at that moment and they just hear you saying I tend to just kill someone, that could seem like
that's the sound bite.
Yeah, so Andreina, would you like to go next with how you add more conflict?
Yeah, what Kat said reminds me of a friend of mine who's an adult thriller author, and she got to a point in the plot where she felt she needed another murder, so she killed someone with a chip fork. And that's why. So I always think about having a chip fork moment. What's
a chip fork?
A chip fork, so if you get chips at the seaside, fish and chips, they come with these little wooden kind of forks that are about that big, and they're just like two jaggedy points. So it's actually, you have to really hit him in the jugular in the right place. Luckily, this murderer knew what he was doing, so or they were. No, it is he. It's he in the scene. But the problem I had with Dead Lucky was that Maxine, the whole defining part of her character was that people think she's stupid and she believes them because she's an influencer and therefore, an airhead who's never done anything in her life, had left school early so she could make money online. She thinks she's internalized everyone's perception of her, and like her shtick is that she's very wacky and she makes mistakes and she falls over. So she's internalized everyone's view of her as being really stupid. So part of the problem I had was kickstarting her into actually investigating because, she doesn't think that she's smart enough to figure out who it is. So she actually ends up facing a direct sort of conflict. I had to create sort of more encounters with the killer. The killer had to do more stuff in order to provoke Maxine into action. And yeah, I sort of got partway through the book and I was getting frustrated. I was like, for God's sake, Maxine, do something. So yeah, I had to sort of add a bit of conflict in there to kind of push it forward.
Great. So Mocha, how about you?
I'd love to hear your answer to this one, Maddie. I can totally see you taking the book and going like, what can I do now to really disrupt things?
Well,
I add conflict in later on a lot. I mean, there's a certain amount in the first draft, kind of the main whatever, but I always need to add more. It's something I never have enough of starting out.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do?
I mean, if I mean, if I'm to answer this question, then I guess my answer is going to be pretty similar to Kat's. Because if I'm in doubt, I kill off a character. And then usually I end up killing off a wrong character. And it's not until I've written about 10,000 more words that I then realise, oh, I needed to kill someone off, but I've killed off completely the wrong character. So then I end up having to go back and kill off a different character and bring the other character back to life. And it just makes it's like really inefficient for like my time and my writing, and I end up redoing so much of it. But yeah, like I know I need to kill someone, but it's always the wrong person, which is a bit awkward at times. But yeah, that's kind of like my go-to thing for when I need more conflict. So yeah, so we're talking already now about like tips for writers. So my next question is for the aspiring writers out there, we're going to give them some writing advice, particularly to do with character creation. So if you could give one piece of advice to a new writer out there in terms of creating a main character, what would you say? Kat, should we come to you first?
Okay. Well, one thing that I did for a workshop a while ago now that I thought was quite a fun exercise is how would your main character write their own obituary? So I think you get quite a lot out of that. You know, the key highlights that they would want somebody to know about their life, and also the tone of it, I think, comes, from, this is what I want somebody to remember about me from your main character's point of view. I think that can help. If you're struggling a bit to find their voice, struggling to think of, what would be like that summation of that character, that can be quite a useful exercise to do.
Yeah, I love that exercise. I'm going to be using that one as well now. Yeah, Mocha, how about you? What's your one piece of advice?
I think starting out, one tends to write more passive characters. I think so. It's a kind of a natural instinct a lot of people have. I mean, I'm not saying everybody does it. So I would say try and make your characters as active as possible from the beginning, because it's like what Andreina was saying earlier about having to kickstart your character. If they're not active, it's very hard to get them going in the story. And you do run into this whole kind of like, how will I get them to move on? How will I get them to take that next step? So I think definitely you start out with somebody who's quite active in the beginning. It can help.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, Andreina, should we come to you next then?
Yeah, so echoing what Mocha just said, it's do something that will make them feel uncomfortable, make them uncomfortable in some way. And the classic thing that popped into my head was the thing I was talking in Harrow Lake with Kat's main character, who has to spend the whole time wearing her dead mother's movie costumes, wandering around town because she's lost her suitcase, and it makes her feel really uncomfortable, and it really does kickstart things and adds to that sense of unease.
Yeah, definitely. And Carly, what's your one piece of advice for new writers?
I'd say, for me, trying to create a character that feels real, it's a lot of writing that character. So just trying and probably throwing a lot of it out, but I guess like just putting that time in to sit down and try and get inside that character's head and put them in different situations and see what happens, and try and access their thoughts and put their thoughts down on the page. And I think, and if you do that for long enough, then I think your character will feel real, and will feel the reader will feel like, I guess they've got like a secret like window into someone else's perception of the world, which I think is what I like about reading great characters too, is that you get to see things from a different perspective. So yeah, I guess my tip is to just write as your character as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's such a good exercise to do, even if you're writing about situations that don't actually arise in your book's plot, or actually things that are relevant. I find it really useful just putting my character in so many different situations just to see how they react, and it just like allows me to get to know my character more, so then I can actually write the actual scenes that are going to be in the book. Yeah, so next up, well, actually, first, I will just mention again for our viewers that this is a live broadcast. So after the next question, we're going to open the floor up to questions from our audience. So I can see we've got one question come in already, which is fantastic. So if you're watching and you've got any questions for our panelists, you can pop them in the live chat facility if you're watching on YouTube. if you're watching on Facebook, then you can put the question in a comment and we'll get it through here. And on Twitter, you can leave it as a reply to the live stream, and we'll be able to answer your questions too. So yeah, if you've got any questions, please do send them in now, and then we will start the Q&A in about 5 minutes for the viewer questions. But before that, I've got one more question that I am dying to ask all of you, and that is, who is your favourite character from another author's book and why? So Carly, we'll come to you first with this one.
This is hard. It's a hard question to answer, but I've got a few, but I'll try and keep it short. But I guess one of the characters that really resonated with me and that I feel like I took a lot from was Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird. I think she has a really great voice. I think it's that mix of she's a kid, so she's very honest in her observations of things, and you also get that nice like juxtaposition between the way she understands things and the way we know things are probably actually working. So I think that's really clever, and I just think the voice of that character is, I could read her voice for forever. Like it's endearing, but it's also clever, it's smart, and it's observant. So yeah, I'd say she's probably my favorite.
Great, yeah, I love that, and it just shows just how important the voice is for a character as well. And like that's almost like the reason that we connect with characters to start with. So Andreina, what about you?
Okay, my answer's silly because I can't really do favorites. I don't really have like an all-time favorite anything. But recently, I was reading It's Behind You by Catherine Foxfield, and I found myself getting completely, massively invested in one of the side characters called Python. And he's just this mad sort of little YouTuber guy. He dresses like an 80s rocker and argues with the main character, who has a brilliant voice as well, and who's really sarcastic and skeptical, and just, you know, a great person to have in a horror film, or a horror book rather. But like Python, for some reason, like every time he was in peril, I was like, don't kill Python. I don't know why. I was just really invested in him. And I think, you know, that's, so I'm going to spin that round just to say, like, the supporting characters and funny comic relief characters are really important too. And I think maybe that's why I was so attached to him, because he was just fun. He was constantly screaming. And it was nice to have the screaming character being a boy for a change. Yes. And yeah, I just found him really entertaining and fun.
Wonderful. Yeah, I need to read that book. I've heard so many wonderful things about it. So Kat, what about you?
Yeah, I was a big Python fan as well, to be honest. And I think Bex is the name of the main character. She was just fantastic too. She had such a good sense of humor, which I think is something that makes a memorable character for me. So I think some other examples that are, you know, have stuck in my head as favorites, definitely Maxine from Dead Lucky, because she faces this really awful situation with, you know, such humor that you can't help but root for her. And like Izzy O'Neill from the exact opposite of OK, and Lucy from Lockwood & Co. You know, these characters who have, you know, a good sense of humor, even when the situation is really grim. I think that always tends to make them stick in my head.
Great. And Mocha, what about you? Which character do you choose?
Well, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about actually Milva Ransuma's main characters tend to stick in my head a long time afterwards. I think she gets great depth into them. Like, they really do feel well-rounded and memorable. And so she was the one that kind of came to me, because it's actually a while since, well, like I think I read one quite recently, but it's only a while since I read some of the earlier ones. And even though I mightn't remember, you know, a huge amount about the plots, the characters still stay. And I think, you know, that shows a strong character if it stays with you several years later.
Yeah, that's such a good answer. And like, I'm a massive fan of Milva Ransuma's books too. Like those characters just are like so realistic and like complex. And dark. Yeah, I love them.
Yeah, I think that's why they
Yeah.
stay. Like, they really feel real, like real
Yeah.
people.
Mhm. So yeah, we'll now open up the floor for viewer and audience questions. So I can see we have got a couple in now, so I'll just get them up onto the screen and then we can all see them. So here is the first one. So Reader Penguin asks, is there a character from another author's book who you wish you could write the point of view from? How would you approach it? So I'll just throw this out to all of you, and whichever one of you would like to answer this one can. I feel mean if I pick one of you when it's like really like unscripted for the question, but I can pick one of you if no one actually volunteers, and then I'll just be really mean and be like the teacher just picking the child to speak. Anybody?
It's hard. It's tricky because I'm
I
trying to
have
think.
thought that though, but I'm just trying to place kind of characters that I have loved. There's so many.
Or would it be somebody
I'm sure
whose
it's a good
POV you want to
idea.
change?
I've got one.
Okay.
Okay, I'd really like to write about Estella from Great Expectations, and I don't know if that's, if someone's done that. If someone's done that, I'm going to go and read it. But I think, fancy being raised to torture men. I mean, it's just such a interesting idea. So yeah, that's what I'd like to write from.
That's such a good answer as well. I love that character so much.
I don't do that. Everyone just ignore that, and I'll just.
So yeah, would any of you others like to answer this one as well, or we can move on to the next question?
Well, now that Andreina's raised the classics, I'm thinking, maybe if I were to write, a teenage Mr. Darcy, I could write, I think, something quite fun there. Some of the classics, I think, throw up some characters that you could probably rework from quite a cool, like, modern perspective. Yeah, maybe something along those lines.
Becky Sharp and Vanity Fair, maybe a modern version. She's quite contemporary anyway, really, for a classic, I think.
Yeah. I mean, just sort of like reimagining classics. That's really, really interesting. Yeah. So we'll move on to our next question. So a couple of questions. Do you do anything when creating characters that's likely to be different to what other authors do? And is there anything you wish you knew when you started writing that you know now? So I'm just going to pick one of you now and put you on the spot. So Carly, would you like to answer the first of these questions?
Sure. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, one of the things I do sometimes is I like to pick a song that I think is a bit of a sound, and I do, but I know other authors do this. I don't know if everyone does it, but yeah. And then as I'm writing so I'll make a bit of a playlist that will go with the thing that I'm working on, and I'll have songs, and I'll even kind of look at the lyrics and make connections between, how my character is feeling or their motivations and things like that. So when I was writing Sugar, I was listening to a lot of Radiohead. It's a very angsty book. There's a lot of Radiohead vibes going on in there. So yeah, I guess music maybe is something that might be a bit different.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Kat, would you like to answer that first question as well?
Yeah, I think other than creating my murder wall, which I think maybe other authors do in kind of a sort of CSI, plotting out things kind of way they probably do. I don't know that I do anything particularly unusual. I develop a playlist after I've written my book. I don't tend to listen to music and stuff like that. I don't have any idea usually of what my main characters like to listen to as music until I know them really well. So we're like on final draft sort of territory here. Yeah, I don't think I do anything particularly unusual when I'm creating characters, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to think if I do anything unusual. I know that when I create characters, if I find that they're not working in the book that I've currently got them in, I will move them to, I have this folder that I just call the lost characters. And it's just like all these characters that I've written, but I absolutely love that they don't fit into a manuscript. And then when I'm working like on a new story idea, if I get a premise, I then just like pick out one of those characters at random, and I just try to see if I can get like this really random character who I already know, just to see if that will work with this new premise. And sometimes it does not work at all in the slightest, and it just makes it such a big mess and I have to leave it. But other times it like sparks these really sort of like interesting ideas and sort of conversations in my head when I'm pairing a premise with a character that I wouldn't have thought would actually fit with that premise. So yeah, that's kind of like the thing that I can think of. Just give a sneaky answer there myself. So yeah, for this second question now, is there anything you wish you knew when you started writing that you know now? So I guess this is like general writing advice, because we've already done some sort of specific character creation advice. So Andreina, we'll come to you with this one.
I think if the things I wish I knew when I started writing, first of all, is I was really, really inhibited when I first started writing, and if something was rubbish, I wouldn't go on with it. And now I really wish I understood that, you know, once you should just keep writing, and even if it's rubbish, it exists now and it didn't exist before. I think when I was in my, like, when I was finally getting really annoyed with myself for not writing anything, I went away for a week back in the days when I could just do that and just wrote. So it was 10 days, and I wrote 35,000 words in 10 days, and they were rubbish. But I had half a YA novel by then, and I didn't have that before. And I, you know, at the end of that week, I sort of was like, oh yeah, if you want to write something, you have to keep writing, even when it's completely rubbish. So I think that's probably my thing. And obviously, like, what you can make it better afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good piece of advice. Like, there's a saying or something, like first drafts don't have to be perfect, they just have to be written. And I have that printed out right next to where I actually write, so now I can just sort of like write without the pressure of that when I'm doing my first draft. So yeah. And Mocha, what about you? Is there anything that you wish you'd known when you'd started writing?
Oh, I totally agree with what you guys are saying. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd add to it, don't edit the first draft. Just keep going. Because once you stop to edit, you lose your flow. And anyway, you'll probably throw most of it out. So you're wasting your, you know, you're better off waiting till you have it in place. And I agree as well. I always think it's kind of like getting the modeling clay in place. You know, the way, like, if you want to model something, you need your clay on the board. So for me, like, the first draft is the clay. And then after that, you're sculpting it.
Yeah, definitely. I love that sort of like comparison. It makes sense a lot. Especially when I'm writing my first draft, I don't know the shape of the story that I'm telling until I get to the end of the first draft. So I wouldn't actually know how to edit the beginning of it if I haven't actually written the ending. So yeah, whereas before, when I was much younger, I would get so het up and caught up on the opening of the manuscript, and I just like rewrite it so many times. And I always felt like I didn't know what I was doing, and that's because I didn't know how it ended. And it took me a long time to realize I just have to get my first draft completely written before I then start tackling and like reshaping it. Yeah, Kat and Carly, have you got anything that you'd like to add here?
Yeah. Something that I wish I'd known when I started writing is that I am like massively inspired by like having visuals around me. I find that really helpful when I'm writing, to have like not just like my murder wall, but also going out and seeing places that are creepy, going on ghost hunts, things like that. I find having the visuals there help me write. They kind of fill my well so that I know, you know, okay, I want to write this, describe it this way. And I think that tends to come through in my writing, that it's kind of like you see the picture, hopefully. So yeah, I think I wish I'd known that when I was writing my messy first draft, that, you know, I needed that sort of visual stimuli, and I think a lot of writers probably do. Not everybody, obviously, but yeah, that would have been helpful.
Okay, yeah. And Carly, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Just quite similar to what you guys were saying before, but I think just that feeling when you're writing, especially when you're writing a first draft, that it's not good enough and that it's bad. Like, I wish I'd known that feeling was normal and that it was just part of the process. Because I think at the beginning, when I was first writing, that voice in your head, it can get into your head and it can make you stop. But now I feel like I recognize, it's still there. I still hear it all the time, but I'm better at going, that's okay. You're meant to be there. Like, it's normal that you're there, but I'm going to ignore you because I know that this is part of the process. And I think, yeah, I kind of wish I'd known that at the beginning, because I think I would have finished more things at the start, and I wouldn't have listened to that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we are now at the end of the time for this panel. So thank you to all of my amazing panelists for joining me. This has been such an enlightening conversation, and I'm definitely going to be rewatching this on YouTube and taking so many notes and just adding it to, like, I have this massive folder, like ring pan folder of like so many writing notes I've made just from panelists and like watching interviews and stuff. So yeah, thank you so much. Just to finish up, would you quickly we have just had another question come in, so I'm going to be really sneaky and add this in. So what are the parts that flow the easiest when you're writing, and are the aspects that feel like a slog still today? Environmental, description, dialogue, etc. So we have 1 minute left. So I'm just going to throw this out, and whichever one of you would like to quickly volunteer and answer it would be great.
I think we'll all say the end flows when it's all coming together. Does everyone agree with that?
Yeah.
I find the sensory details are still a slog. I always have to add them in afterwards. Madeline, you're brilliant at them. They just seem to flow into your first draft, whereas I struggle with them every time and I never have enough, even after struggling.
Mm-hmm.
I find the opposite. I find like it's easier to write the details in the first draft because I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the plot is, and I don't know what's going to happen next. So if I'm like, I've got to get a few more 100 words, I'm like, I'll describe that forest for 200 words or something. And then, I find that is easier.
Okay, great. So we are at the end of the time now. So very quickly, if you tell our viewers where they can find you online, sort of like your website or social media. So Kat, would you like to do that first?
Yeah, my website is katelliswrites.com, and all of my socials and stuff are linked from there. I'm everywhere.
Wonderful. And Mocha?
My website is mochavonbee.com, and I'm on Instagram as Mocha Von Bee, and I'm on most other things too, but I'm mostly on Instagram, I think, really.
Okay, great. And Carly?
I don't have a website, but I'm working on that. But I'm on Twitter at Carly Beth Nugent, and I'm on Instagram at Carly_Nugent. I'm not super active on those platforms, but I am on there. So if anyone, that's a good way to reach me through there. So
good to know. And Andreina?
All you need to do to find me is spell my name, which is really hard because on Instagram, on Twitter, I'm Andreina Cordani, and annoyingly on TikTok, I'm A Cordani XO. Just spell the really hard to spell name and you'll find me.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. And we have a full schedule of panels, readings, interviews, and workshops continuing for the rest of today, as well as tomorrow and both days of the weekend as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.